What is going on?
Well, we're back, I guess.
We're back, and you're
Everybody.
not in your normal location.
No, I am not. I am in a little town called Dover, Tennessee. Not too far from the Kentucky border. Here with my wife Wendy, who's already been here for a month. So I'm just joining her, and I'll be here for the whole month of May. So get used to this background, which is pretty boring.
It's really boring. I can't even tell that you've written books before.
I know it's hard. It's hard to believe.
It's impossible to believe. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I
how?
don't have any books over my shoulder here.
No. So basically, there's no proof that you've written any books that I can see.
Apparently, yes, I've entered a realm, a reality where I'm just some old guy.
Just an old white guy. What's up, John? John's here. Say hi in the comments if you're here. If you're watching along on Facebook,
Yes.
YouTube, wherever you
Happy
are.
Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to
Yeah.
all of our mothers out there.
Happy Mother's Day.
We
For
love
those of you that it's a hard day.
Yes, some of you, I know.
Shout out to y'all too.
For different reasons, yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm making chicken parm. You can call me Matty Cutlets over here today. My parents are in town. Yeah. That's what I'm gonna do for Mother's Day.
Chicken Parmesan.
Chicken parm.
I'll have to get your recipe.
I'm just gonna wing it. I haven't made chicken parm in a while.
No pun intended, right? You're gonna wing the chicken?
Yeah.
Just gonna wing it.
Just gonna wing it. Yeah, for loving chicken so much, I do like to eat chicken also. But
no, don't tell your chicken friends.
They would never be on the chopping block. I love them too much.
I'm sure they'd be very pleased to know that.
What's up, Donna? Hi from Delaware.
Hello.
So Keith, you're in Dover, but not Delaware.
Yeah, Dover, Tennessee, not Delaware, the state.
Oh, the Hobbit is hosting. Yeah, if that's me, I'm a Hobbit. I even came fully loaded, fully equipped with the hair and everything now.
So you're not cutting your hair until Trump leaves office? Is that the deal?
Until fascism is defeated.
Well, oh boy, that's it's gonna be a long one.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long one. I have to put it in a man bun. It's gonna get too long.
Yeah, man bun. That'll be great.
Well, speaking of fascism, we're launching the Collective next week.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We need to start getting some stuff out there because it's coming up in a couple of days.
Yeah.
The Collective. This is our attempt to, partnering. We're building a platform, but we are depending on the. We have assembled quite a bit of a resistance group of writers, who are going to help us. We have poets and theologians and mystics and all kinds of different people who are going to be contributing to the Collective, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We will hope you will join us, and we'll be sharing about that in the next couple of days.
Yeah, it's going to be our our own little Antifa, anti-fascist.
Yes.
Pinko commie rag, as people on the right might call it.
It's an online magazine movement. No advertising.
Well, it's an anti-MAGA zine.
Ooh, I like that. Anti-MAGA zine. I like that. We'll have to use that somewhere in the tagline.
I'm all about my double entendres. Let's go.
Anti-MAGA zine.
Okay. Anti-MAGA zine. Yeah, so I'm going to put that there on the scrolling bar down below if you're watching on YouTube, elsewhere. The Collective.
They can go there now, right?
You can go there now. You can subscribe. It's $5 a month. No ads ever. Like, it's not, you're going to get good stuff. You get what you pay for in today's day and age. And I've been to some websites that I would use regularly, but there's so many goddamn ads that pop up.
Yeah.
Again, you get what you pay for. So,
if nothing else, just go to the Collective, which is QUOLLECTIVE, the Collective. Because everything we do with, has to have the QUO in there somewhere. So yes, go to thecollective.com, and if nothing else, just check it out. I mean,
and there's free resources on there. There's letters to your Congress people. There's letters to your school board. There's letters to things like templates like that you can create your own PDF, print it out, or save it and email it. I'm doing at least one essay a month. That's a free resource. I've written one on Sam Cooke. I've written one on why it's important to support BIPOC and queer-owned businesses. Yeah. I've written, and the next one that I'm gonna have loaded up during launch, is gonna be the irony of people like JD Vance being MAGA, because JD Vance, I don't know if he's reading the same Lord of the Rings that I am, but he's a Lord of the Rings fan, and this motherfucker loves the ring. So yeah. So it's gonna be a pretty heavily political, more political than maybe some of our books, even though our books can be political as well. But it's gonna be focused on our current situation, and so
yeah.
And we're never gonna fucking kiss the ring to no one.
That's right. So it's online journalism that's fighting fascism. We'll be talking about politics, media, religion. There'll be some satire, poetry, a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, go check it out.
John says, did you know that QUO could mean a place within a place? I like that.
Sure.
I'm going to look that up to verify that. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So part two
of us reacting to Sean McDowell, reacting to Dan McClellan, reacting to Sean McDowell.
I know that you know that you know that I know that you know.
That's right. So part one was so much fun. We took a little break in there, but now we're back.
Yeah, and I think I can bring it up on the stage here. I could put that like that. And if YouTube puts any fucking ads up there, I apologize. I don't have YouTube Premium. So
okay,
it's what it is, man.
It. If there's an ad, just mute it.
Mute that motherfucker. If Sean's talking, we'll just mute it. So to catch it, I don't even know where we left off, but basically, does the Bible contradict?
Yeah, that's the topic. Yes,
that's the topic.
So Sean McDowell originally did a little TikTok video claiming that there are no contradictions in the Bible. Dan McClellan, a Bible scholar, responded to that video, and now here's Sean and his friend John McClatchy, Dr. John McClatchy, reacting to Dan McClellan's reaction to Sean McDowell, and we will be reacting to Sean's reaction.
And just a bit of housekeeping here, and this is not just a shot against Sean and John. But when you're on video, get the heads lined up. Bro looks like he's like a hobbit size. Like sit up.
Yeah.
Like there's production behind Sean's YouTube, right? Like line the heads up.
Yeah, or adjust your camera, maybe move it down a little bit.
Just your camera, my guy. No one wants to be looking like this. Like
here we go. Let's do this. Yeah, there we go. There's a nice shot of my ceiling.
But only one of us, and I'll do down low so you can just see.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
My breasts. Come on, man. A little bit of fucking.
Come on, center your head in the camera.
Look at this guy. He looked like he's reclining. Okay.
It's just how horrific and racist these people were who did this. But it also points out that two different accounts, although they totally seem to be in contradiction, don't necessarily contradict. I think if those photographs had not arisen, the conclusion based on Dan's methodology would have been clearly these contradict. Now, even if they did contradict, we still should have concluded without the photographs that the boys were hung. That's the key.
Okay. I don't know. I don't remember what they're talking about.
They're talking about,
but
there was something about these two black men that had been lynched.
Okay. It's hanged, Sean. It's hanged. If you say the boys were hung, that has an entirely different meaning, Sean.
Yes,
hanged is the past tense of hang, as in a hanging or a.
Yeah, they were hanged.
Just again, a point of order.
Yes.
Factor,
thank you.
But nonetheless, in this case, we find a harmonization. So how do we approach gospel accounts clearly when photographs are not going to emerge? Now, two other things. Some of this really rests on what's meant by a contradiction, Jonathan. Cambridge Dictionary defines contradiction as a fact or statement that is the opposite of what someone has said. So a contradiction, philosophically speaking, involves affirming A and non-A. Such claims cannot be reconciled. So referencing one angel is not a contradiction with referencing two. If only one angel was said, that and referred to the same visit at the same time, that would be a contradiction with two angels. And we might not have all the details to reconcile the different accounts, but our task is to offer possible or plausible scenarios by which they don't logically contradict. That's the task of a historian. Now, I just got to draw one more point out because.
Can I just pause it there?
Sure.
Also, I know I'm being pedantic and historian. Sorry. I guess it depends on whether there's good faith behind the like on the surface. I agree with him that where he's at so far, but if you're an apologist, like these folks seem to be, is that you're always going to be looking for those explanations instead of just looking at the facts in front of you. So
yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like if your goal is, like, if you're starting with the presupposition that the Bible has no contradictions, and then you're looking for the quote unquote plausible explanations on why there are no contradictions, your methodology is going to be a lot different and more skewed than if you truly are an historian and you don't have a dog in the fight. You're just looking at it as you would look at any historical document or historical movement or historical philosophy or whatever.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, and John is agreeing with you here in the comments too. I think that's sort of the problem. This is kind of the point that I think Dan McClellan is trying to make in his reaction video that Sean is missing, is that if you were just an historian, then you would admit that one source says there was one person, and there's another source that says there were two, and you, because you don't have a dog in the fight, because you weren't an apologist, you would just note the fact that there are two different conflicting views and move on. An apologist is the one trying to force them to reconcile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where an historian wouldn't force them to reconcile. The historian would say, well, maybe there was one and maybe there was two. I honestly don't know. There's two different sources. I might say I lean more towards this one than that one for reasons like, you know, how reliable is that source compared to the other source, or something like that. That's, again, what an objective historian would do. That's not what Sean and his friend are doing. They are not historians. They are apologists. And they are trying to, they're trying to reconcile these because they have to both be right. There's no way one could be right and the other one could be wrong, because one of them would be Luke and the other one will be Matthew, and they can't have that.
Yeah, they do what fundamentalist atheists do, except with different conclusions already in mind. Like,
yeah.
And you know, and I think a lot of it has to do, like, we're focusing, like, these questions are all just so, it only matters if there's one angel here and two angels there, or this many thieves here and this many thieves there. It only matters if you're already presupposing the Bible is the inerrant word of God, or that, like,
Yep.
like, none of this matters more than the theological contradictions. Those ones matter way more. Is God a blessing and a cursing God, or is God a blessing God only? Because the Bible also says both of those things, which theologically could be true, which is why we get the Augustinian Janus-faced God. So he has two faces. He's schizophrenic. He's bipolar. He's theologically torn in two, because sometimes he's this way and sometimes he's that way. Well, if both of those things are true, they're contradictory. But if they're in the same God, that creates a monster of a God.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting. I guess it's because the original video, when Sean is saying there's no contradictions, the original video is sort of laser focused on Jesus. It's all about the resurrection. And so he's not widening his scope to the entire Bible, because if you did, then you would notice things like this, right? Like you're saying. Because if you look at the entire Bible, oh my gosh, there are so many contradictions. I mean, I don't know if anyone's written a book, but someone should write a book just collecting all of the possible contradictions between Genesis and Revelation.
Yeah,
There's
but I do agree with Sean though. It depends on what our definition of the contradiction is, because I wouldn't even necessarily say it's a contradiction. I don't even know if that's the right word. Like if I forget the exact story, but there's a story in, I think it's 2 Kings, about a slaughter at, I forget the place, but it's ordained by God.
Yeah.
And then later, I think it's Hosea or maybe Amos, is like, no, God is going to punish you for what you did there.
Right, but
It's
in
like,
the original
but God
version,
ordained it.
it says God commanded it and blessed it. Yeah,
And blessed it, and then a
then
later
the other
prophet
guy
comes
says,
and is like, nah.
yeah, you're going to be cursed
So
for that.
does the Bible contradict itself? Only if you have, again, only if you have the rigid view that Sean would probably have of the Bible, and not that like a rabbinic view, which is like, it's not a contradiction if the point is the argument.
Yeah, you're right.
Like it's like saying that you and I are going to have a debate, and man, they're really contradicting, as if there's like one message. It's like, no, we're debating. Like there's not.
Right,
That's
right.
weird.
That's not a contradiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
I
get
think.
let's get back to this.
Yeah, let's, because we got a lot. There's a lot here.
We
We're
got a
not
lot,
even
I
halfway
know.
through.
Jesus, don't remind me.
We'll bring this back later. He refers to Luke giving us all the relevant details. I'm not sure that Luke says that. If you go back to Luke 1:1-4 in his prologue, he says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. So Luke is saying there's other accounts written before, probably at least Mark, just as they were handed down to those who were first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Luke's not an eyewitness, but he's investigating eyewitnesses. With this in mind, since I have myself carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. You may know the certainty of things you have been taught. Luke's not giving us all the relevant details. He's giving us sufficient detail for his audience and for his purpose. Your take?
No, I completely agree with you. And I don't even see this as an apparent contradiction. Matthew and Mark simply spotlight the angel who spoke. They omit mention of the other who presumably did not speak.
Should we skip
this guy? Yeah, let's skip this guy. Because all he's going to do is say, I completely agree with you, Sean, because I'm a guest on your show.
And I frankly don't care how many angels, like it doesn't make any
really
difference.
And yes, debating about how many angels there were, that is not one of the most concerning ones. Like, who cares really how many angels there were? These are not the kind of contradictions we should be concerned about. There are others that are much more problematic.
Yeah. It's like when Rob Bell says, like, did Jonah really get swallowed by a whale? And I'm already bored. Like,
yeah. That's not the point.
Let's go to the next clip.
But it's even worse than that, because the 4 gospel accounts of the resurrection of Jesus do not differ just in the number of angels. They differ in most of the narrative details. Let's take a look. Here's Mark's account. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. When they arrived to a tomb where the stone had already been rolled back. They encountered no one outside of the tomb, unless this narrator is profoundly negligent and incompetent. This narrator does not think they encountered anything out of the ordinary outside the tomb, because they go on. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. Now let's go to Matthew. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. Fair enough. We have consistency. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. Now, I want to point out this narrative, and suddenly there was a great earthquake, indicates that this was something that they witnessed.
Yes, they were.
If they're giving background information and saying off in the distance, beyond their ability to perceive, this was going on, they wouldn't have said, and suddenly. The and suddenly is internal to the narration of their journey to the tomb. That's how the Greek is to be read. His appearance was like lightning and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. So here, according to the Greek of Matthew, the women see the cause of the stone being rolled away from the tomb. And then before they enter the tomb, they encounter an angel sitting upon the stone that was just rolled away, telling them what's going on. Now, in order to reconcile Matthew and Mark, we have to imagine that these women are encountering multiple stations of angels who are going to scare them and tell them not to be scared. First on the outside and then on the inside. And Mark was profoundly negligent to say, oh yeah, they went in and there was a dude sitting there and they got, But according to Matthew, they were already freaked out by an earthquake and an angel descending from heaven and rolling the stone away from the tomb and sitting there and telling them stuff. These two accounts are not reconcilable, not plausibly. You could say, well, you can't say it's impossible, and that's debatable, but that demonstrates that the goal is not to actually generate a legitimate argument. It's just to try to gin up the tiniest little sliver of not impossible, and to live and breathe and have your being in that tiny little sliver of not impossible, because that's all your audience needs to feel justified in accepting that dogma.
Jonathan, you've actually done a deep dive.
I mean, that's pretty solid.
That was fucking great. Thank you, Dan. No, and look, and again, this is just between Mark and Matthew. You could add in Luke and John, because they also have very different descriptions of what's happening at the resurrection. But just like,
and not to mention the day that Jesus is even crucified, you know what I mean?
Right,
like,
I agree on that.
Yeah, again, it's like, do you base your faith on this interpretation of the Bible, on this theory of inspiration of the Bible? And I don't mean theory scientifically.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Thank you, Dan. I think that was really great. And that's just one beautiful example of how, look, Mark, like he said, I mean, he just said it. The Mark is clueless. It doesn't have the whole story if Luke is correct. But if Mark is correct, then Luke is embellishing and adding stuff in there that's not in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
He adds an earthquake. He puts a guard there. Well, there's no guard mentioned in Mark. They get there and there's nobody there, right? It's all, whatever happened has already happened. There's no one there. They wander into the tomb just to take a peek, and there's a guy sitting there, not an angel, a young man just sitting there chilling.
Well, maybe it's an angel that disguised like a shapeshifter and as a young man.
But in Matthew, he's got a face like lightning, right? And he descended from heaven. Like,
I know. I'm just again. They're living in that. They're living in that. Is it impossible?
But is it impossible? I mean, in a way, yeah, kind of, maybe impossible. But anyway, okay, let's go on. I want to hear what Sean's.
I mean, you list some of this out in your article in response to this video that he's posted. Give us your thoughts on why you think a plausible harmonization works here.
Yeah, I find it curious that McClellan insists on an interpretive rendering of Matthew 28:2, the rendering "and suddenly." The Greek text there says "ke edu," which is a very common expression in the New Testament, and its literal meaning is "and behold," which is how it's translated in the ESV, for example. I think most translations render it "and behold," and so McClellan has offered an interpretive translation, not the literal meaning of the text, and it does not necessarily imply that the woman witnessed the earthquake or the descent of the angel. In fact, a better way of conveying the meaning of "and suddenly" would be a phrase like "ke exephanes," which is also used in the New Testament to,
but not used in that passage.
Denote the meaning of
what?
Like he's saying a better way would be this other Greek phrase And then that would explain it. But that phrase he's mentioning is not the one used in Matthew. It's still, to Dan's point, if that other phrase had been used, then okay, Jonathan, then yeah, maybe you'd be right. But that's not the phrase that was used. Why is he arguing for a different phrase?
he's saying the opposite. Like he's saying if it was going to be suddenly, then it would have been a different phrase.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I thought he was okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I misunderstood where he was going with it.
Yeah, that's what I think he's.
Okay, let him go.
I mean, all right, yeah.
And suddenly, and in fact, the passage regarding the angel, verses 2 through 4, is introduced by the particle gar, and its purpose is to explain the earthquake and the state of affairs as found by the women upon their arrival at the tomb. And in describing the descent of the angel, Matthew employs an aorist participle, katavas, which can be rendered for an angel of the Lord had descended. In fact, some translations render it that way. And so there's no reason then to infer from Matthew that the women necessarily witnessed the descent of the angel. Sure, it could be read in that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to imply that. In fact, I understand the do as simply giving us some background to explain the situation as the women discovered it upon their arrival at the tomb.
Let's keep going.
But wait, there's more. But on the first day of the week at early.
But here's the thing to what Jonathan is saying. No one, no scholar, no apologist would read Matthew in the Greek the way he's suggesting it could be read if Mark didn't exist and have an alternate version, right? The only reason you would say, well, this verb could mean this, and this phrase could mean that, and there are some versions that some translations do use this phrase instead of that phrase, and therefore, it's plausible. But you would never think that way. You would never even consider such things if Mark didn't pose a problem, right? You're admitting that Mark is a problem. To even argue this way, I used to be in apologetics, and this kind of stuff drives me crazy because the same guys, Sean and Jonathan, if you and I were debating with them on some other issue, let's say about universalism, and we pointed out to them, let's say in Philippians, right, that it says that every knee will bow and every tongue will exomologio gladly confess, and that most of the time that word exomologio means gladly, to do something gladly and freely. They wouldn't concede that. They'd say, well, there's another way you could read it, possibly this other way maybe.
It could mean under coercion.
Yes.
Under threat of hell.
So it's like this constant, this little twisting and turning, and maybe sometimes in other contexts, maybe it could be possibly, therefore I reject this, right? But or do the same thing and say, therefore I accept this alternate strange reading. Again, whichever fits my narrative, whatever fits my assumption.
That's it. They're starting with the ending place.
Yes.
And they're weaving their way back through to get to the premises so that it can all connect the dots rather than just simply like Sean says, you're supposed to approach it like an historian, but you're not. Again, you're not approaching it like an historian because you're not an historian.
Right.
You're an apologist.
You're an apologist.
And getting this right could mean your eternal salvation. Getting this right could mean a lot of different things. And I don't know, if I'm just an historian, I don't have that threat.
No.
I don't have that eschatology necessarily. That's not my concern.
Yeah.
So I always question people like this when they like that. All this has been just very flowery language, well-spoken articulation with semi-decent audio quality and visual quality. But it really hasn't said anything yet. It could possibly mean this. And in this context, it could mean this, and it could be that.
It's not wrong.
All to prove that these idiots in Mark who never got the gospel somehow got the writing. Eventually, this created this writing that doesn't contradict anything. They never got Jesus, but those same early Christians wrote some really good books about it. And it's like, if I never get something, like I've been trying to garden, every plant I plant dies.
Yeah.
but I wrote a really good book on it that people are going to use and call, this is the word of God of gardening.
Yeah.
You're like, something doesn't line up here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Weird. It's a
yeah.
weird approach. Sorry.
No, that's good. All right, so they're getting back to Dan. So I want to hear what Dan has to say.
Back to Dan.
Early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. Wait a minute. We heard in Mark that they bought the spices after the Sabbath had passed. But according to Luke 23:56, they prepared spices before the Sabbath. And here it says they brought the spices that they had prepared.
Jonathan, you wanted to weigh in on specifically the issue of spices.
It's both, right? They prepared. And
so McClellan observes that in Luke, we read that on the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. That's Luke 24, verse 1. And McClellan understands Luke to indicate that these spices were prepared before the Sabbath. But according to Mark 16:1, the woman bought the spices after the Sabbath had passed. So how might we go about harmonizing those texts? Well, first of all, I note that Luke does not, in fact, say explicitly that the spices were prepared before the Sabbath, right? And
why do we want to? I'm sorry. Why do we want to harmonize the text?
Why?
This is the gospel of Sean and John. Then, if we
now it is.
now it's a new gospel. It's a fifth gospel. It's the gospel of harmonizing the other four gospels. Like that. Why is that your why? There's no reason. That is a presupposition. You have no basis or evidence, or why would you do that?
Yeah, well, because the scriptures have to be inerrant and infallible, Matt.
Again.
And so therefore, since there therefore cannot be such a thing as a contradiction, I must show you how there isn't. I must demonstrate, see, there's no contradiction. Just because it says in one place that they purchased them, prepared them before, and then the other one, it says that they bought them on the way that morning. That's not a contradiction. Maybe there's some of the spices they prepared before, got a couple of things, and they stopped by, the grocery store and picked them up on the way. And therefore they're both true. See?
That's historians don't do that.
Yeah, historians don't play those games. Historians, no. Homies don't play that. Historian homies don't play that.
No, they don't.
All right.
And verse 56, the first part of that verse, it merely indicates that the women purchased spices following Jesus' burial without specifying whether this took place before or after the Sabbath. Now, the second part of that verse clarifies that the women rested on the Sabbath day in accordance with the Jewish law. And plausibly, Luke does not know exactly when the spices were purchased, whether it was before or after the Sabbath, and so he perhaps leaves it intentionally ambiguous. Now, even if one adopts McClellan's interpretation and takes Luke 23:56 to indicate that the spices were in fact prepared before the Sabbath, the texts don't seem to me to be particularly difficult to harmonize. So one could envision, for example, that Joanna, being better off than the other women, remember she's the wife of Huzzah, Herod's household manager, already has spices at her house, potentially, which she had time to prepare at home. Perhaps Joanna and one or more of the other women spent the Sabbath at Joanna's house and had time to prepare the spices before the Sabbath began, while the two Marys and Salome had to purchase them after the Sabbath at first dawn. Luke 24:10 lists two Marys, Joanna, and an unspecified number of other women who went to the tomb. So we don't know how many women came to the tomb on Easter morning. Joanna may even have been the primary source behind Luke's account of the women at the tomb. Luke is, in fact, the only evangelist who mentions Joanna at all, including her relationship to Herod's household manager, Huzzah. So if that's the case, it's consistent with the conjecture that she was the one who already had spices at home and that she could prepare, and perhaps one or more other women stayed with her that evening. We don't know, but that's at least a plausible harmonization of that text.
The task is to provide a plausible.
Okay, this just gets to be so ridiculous. Now it feels like total fan fiction. And then Joanna, because she also, she realized she needed this, and then she called this person who's also mentioned in this other place over here, and so then she said, "No, I don't have that." But then she went next door to other friend who's also mentioned in this other text on this other side. Like, why are you making this shit up?
Doesn't the Bible say God is not the author of confusion? This is not great prose. Like
these scenarios are ridiculous.
Let me use an analogy, and I'll do spoiler alerts for The Last of Us.
Okay.
In the video game, Frank and Bill do not have the type of ending that Frank and Bill in episode 3 of the show do.
Right.
You come across Frank's dead body. He's been bitten and he's hanging from the rafters, and you get a last letter from him to Bill that you read, and it's not like they were madly in love.
No.
In the show, they die together in this romantic way because Frank gets sick and Bill doesn't want to live without him any longer. Bill, the survivalist, the archetypal American, right?
Yes.
Softens for Frank, who gives him a reason to live and trust again. And they go out together taking something, I don't know what, arsenic and wine or whatever it is, and they die together in this Romeo and Juliet, or Romeo and Romeo because they're gay.
Yeah. Romeo
and then you come across Sean and John, who are like, well, maybe when you come across this, maybe, I mean, you don't actually see them die, and you don't really know if it was poison at all. He could have, and then maybe that night the infected got in and Frank got bit. You don't actually see it. And Bill was down working in the basement and had forgotten, because he actually, you don't know about this, but he has some sort of mental issue, PTSD, and he doesn't remember all these things, and part of it was a dream, and you're just like, no, bitch, they changed the story.
No, see, this is exactly right. Like you could play this kind of game with so many things, and if you try to do this with anything else, people would look at you and say, like, what is wrong with you,
man? What is wrong? That's
why are you trying to make them both line up? Why?
There's an ulterior motive here, which is that you will go to hell if you do not believe this stuff.
Yes, they believe. See, Sean and John believe that if Dan is right, and there are these incredible, contradictions or just completely different versions of the story, then that discredits the Gospels, and one of them isn't as accurate as the other one. And you'd have to pick which one you think is the most accurate, rather than harmonize them. And again, a historian would do that. An historian would probably say, if it was just an historian, the historian would probably say, okay, look, Mark is the oldest version. It's also the one with the least number of angels and miraculous events and, all these kind of crazy things happening. So Mark is, of the four, is probably the most accurate, because it's just a very normal, ordinary thing. Matthew adds earthquakes and angels with faces like lightning. And, Luke adds this other, a legion of angels and shit. Like, that's what you would do if you were a historian. You would say, okay, which one is more likely than the other ones and why? Historians don't harmonize, especially stuff that's this far apart.
Well, and especially when you're like, these guys got theological agendas. Matthew's theological agenda is a lot different than John. John's the wacky uncle that came in from wherever, and you're like, where'd this guy come from?
Yeah.
But let me point to Tolkien real quick. Our myths may be misguided, and I will call the Bible mythology, but they steer, however shakily, toward the true harbor. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Some of them steer us better toward the true harbor than, maybe Galatians, better than the epistles, the pastoral epistles, the second Timothy, and
of course.
The Titus, and all that bullshit.
All right, so let's come back to our video.
Back to our resident scholars.
Full scenario in which they don't contradict, given that we're
also, are you hearing that crackling noise every time I play their stuff?
No.
Their audio sucks.
Okay.
Given greater detail. A plausible scenario is sufficient to remove the charge of contradiction. And I think you've done that. Well said. Let's look at the next clip.
They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. So Luke agrees with Mark that the stone had already been rolled away by the time they arrived. And Matthew is the one who says they witnessed the stone being rolled away by the angel, the first angelic station that they had to encounter. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. So Mark said they went in and saw one man seated. Luke says they went in and were sitting there scratching their heads when suddenly there were two men standing beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to the hands of sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again. So Luke's account is entirely different. And I really think the notion that these women went from angelic station to angelic station and had to be terrified anew at each station as these angels told them the same thing each time is a pretty laughable way to try to resolve these contradictions.
Now, it's possible
it's also just like terrible prose.
Yeah.
Like it's just a bad story.
Yeah.
Even if it's true, like the story, this is why the flat Bible is a dead Bible. The story sucks.
Yeah.
It's bad writing.
Well, here's the thing too, and I know they're not going to get into this, but if you had a longer conversation, you could take the time to show this. Years ago, when I was still a Southern Baptist, college student, I did a Bible study on the Gospel of Luke. And I started noticing, that was the first time I started noticing discrepancies between Luke and Matthew and Mark. And what I noticed throughout Luke was that Luke has a habit of turning one person into two people. And right. So like there's a place in Matthew where it says a leper comes up to Jesus and he heals him. But in Luke, it's two lepers. There's a thing where there's one blind man, later there's two blind men. In Matthew, there's one, Legion, the one guy at the tomb, and in Luke, there's two men at the tomb, but only one of them gets the demons cast out. So Luke has a habit of sort of exponentially magnifying the number of people involved in certain things, which I think is probably what's happening in this situation. Like, why is there one angel in Mark, and there's one person, one young man in Mark, one angel in Luke and Matthew, and then two people in Luke, two angels in Luke?
Because if there's two, there's obviously there's one, and then there's one. I mean, there's two ones,
obviously
so it's not wrong. There's two really ones.
Two. Yeah, but Luke only one that thought it was important to mention that. Oh, there was another one. There was an extra.
There was one and there's a one and one.
There's always a superfluous one for some reason in Luke. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
We're losing folks here in some of the nuance, but this is really the meat of it. And these details matter. Give us your take on this one.
Sure they do. Okay, here we go.
Sure. So McClellan emphasizes that in Mark, the angel is explicitly said to be sitting inside the tomb, right? So it says in Mark 16:5, and entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side.
A young man, not an
and McClellan believes that Matthew indicates that the women encountered the angel on the outside of the tomb before entering. But the text actually doesn't say that in Matthew. It merely...
What's up?
Doesn't Matthew say that he's sitting on top of the stone, right? He rolls the stone and sits on it.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Why does it seem like Jonathan has had like 7 different accents this time? I can't figure it out yet.
Indicates that the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come see the place where he lay." There is no indication in the text of where specifically the angel was when the woman encountered him or when this was said.
Let's go to the next one.
But wait, there's still more. We can go to John. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. Wait a minute. The other account said the sun had risen. It was dawn. John says, no, it was still dark. And this agrees with Mark and with Luke.
Well, it could be dark during dawn. A little dark. I mean, it depends on...
It's still dark, sort of.
I mean, and look, I see a sunset a lot different than Mike Machuga when I'm up at his house and we're at the farm. He's colorblind, so it might look darker, less red. I mean, I might be able to say, oh, it's still sunny out. It's still... Maybe the writer of John has a little color issue.
But here's the thing: none of them were actually there when it happened, so it doesn't matter.
But they told it. They told the way they told the story.
So it must have been dark. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because they can't see color as well.
that the stone had already been moved by the time Mary arrived. But that's not what Matthew says.
Right.
So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. Then we get this story about Peter and the other disciple running to the tomb, looking in. Jesus is not there. There.
Oh, crap. A little commercial break for you.
Squarespace. A little commercial free of charge.
Thanks. Here we go.
Oh, no. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh,
What
shit.
happened? You skipped?
Partly reveals just how horrific.
Where did it go? It went back.
Has been raised as he.
Motherfucker. Where were we?
I don't know. Somewhere.
I think we
Try that.
were right here. John.
She saw
Yeah,
two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. And then Jesus tells her these things. So this account is entirely different from the others. The synoptics at least share some details, even as other details wildly contradict each other. But here we have a totally different sequence of events. The angels never tell Mary anything. It is Jesus who reports on the events of his resurrection, which stands in direct contradiction to the accounts of the synoptic gospels, where the angels either outside the...
Well, hold on. Jesus could have been there telling the angel who was also there in station 2 that then told Mary, and Mary...
How? Okay. Jesus personally was alive and standing there, but Mark and Matthew and Luke
they omit it.
Important. That's not the important part of the resurrection. I mean, yeah, Jesus, but let's just leave that part out. I don't think that's important. Why do we have to mention that?
That's a good point. You think they'd mention that? They would. They just mention the other guy.
Yeah. Oh, you know what was really amazing? There was a guy sitting there. Oh,
no one else?
Well,
not that I noticed.
Jesus, I mean, but you know, that's not the most important thing. There was this angel. No, there were two angels. Dude,
with the face
so
like
the tomb or inside the tomb, either sitting or standing, either after they have witnessed the stone being rolled away from the tomb or not, are telling the ladies these things.
So he's claimed there's contradictions in the synoptics. Matthew, Mark, and Luke now brings in John and said this adds another layer of contradiction.
Of course it does, Sean.
What's your take?
Sure. So he points out that Mary came to the tomb according to John 20, verse 1, while it was still dark, whereas Luke 24:1 indicates that the sun had risen. But the expression in the Greek that's used by Luke is orthro batheos, which literally means deep dawn. And it refers to the very early hours of the morning. In fact, the ESV renders this early dawn. So it's not at all implausible, I think, to
every answer is the same. It's like, well, it's not totally implausible.
Here's the thing. They're both doing exactly what Dan already said that apologists will do. They look for that little sliver of maybe.
And then they do it.
And then now here they are doing it. Yes.
It's so funny.
It could mean that.
It's wildly interesting to watch
historians
grown men act like this.
Yeah.
To watch. Yeah, this is like you get this answer from your teenager and it's like, whoa, it could have been this. And you're like, but it fucking wasn't, dude.
Yes.
You're like, but there's a chance it could have been.
It
You're
might have been.
Like, that's childish. That's not grown folk talk.
Right.
That's not the way grown folks talk.
Believe that at early dawn it might still have been somewhat dark. So I'd actually argue this is probably one of the weakest of McClellan's examples. As far as the sequence in John and how it allegedly is different from the sequence in the synoptics.
Allegedly.
So he observes that in John's account, Mary Magdalene reports to Peter and John that the tomb's empty, and she doesn't know what's happened to Jesus. And then Peter and John then come and inspect the tomb. They find it empty, and then they leave Mary alone, and she has an encounter with the risen Jesus. But the angels don't tell Mary anything in John. And then McClellan notes that this is an entirely different sequence of events from the Synoptic Gospels. But the episode with Mary at the tomb in John is clearly an episode that's distinct from the woman's encounter with Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels, right? So there's no contradiction there because these are two separate and independent events. And moreover, I think plausibly Mary left the larger group of women prior to their encounter with the angel and with the risen Jesus. And this is even lightly suggested by the word choice of Mary when she's addressing Peter and John in John 20, verse 2, where she says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know. In Greek, it's oudamen. We do not know. The verb oudamen is in the plural, where they have laid him. So, the use of the plural verb there, oudamen, implies that she is speaking on behalf of other women, even though John spotlights Mary Magdalene in particular. And so this would explain why she doesn't know what's happened to Jesus, even though, according to the Synoptic Gospels, the group of women who went to the tomb on Easter morning encountered an angel and the risen Jesus at the tomb.
All right, we got just a hand.
That was weak.
But no one mentions in the Synoptics, no mention that Jesus was there.
Yeah,
I mean, he
Jesus
just
was
said it,
there.
right?
I mean,
He just said
yeah.
that they were there, but that they didn't mention that, though.
Yeah.
Don't you just get
That's
that
not
from John?
important. That's not
So
important.
you import what John. So this is how gospels are created, right? You created your own gospel. So you took something from John that says Jesus was there. You put it back into it, and then you took some stuff from the Synoptics, and then you created your own gospel, the Gospel of Sean John, the mix.
The gospel of according to Sean John. Yeah, that's what this is, and this is what apologists do, and this is why it's exhausting, because you can't really have a conversation, a rational conversation, when they're constantly playing these little games. It's just like Mr. Potato Head, right? Like, well, but over here we take this, and over here we take that, and it could mean this, and it might mean that, and
right. And then you realize, like, isn't it Occam's razor that says, like, the most simplest explanation is probably the true one, which is that that it's not the inerrant word of God, and there are very fallible, very compromised people telling stories with their own agendas and their own grids and their own filters and their own subjectivity and their own whatever. And that's how the stories fucking happen, because that's how every fucking story happens in the history of humanity.
Yeah, and also understand that the Gospel of Mark, which we started with, is the oldest version. It's very and the simplest and the shortest, with the least number of fantastic details. And you don't get Jesus personally standing there at the tomb until John's Gospel, which is what, a couple hundred years after Mark.
Not a couple hundred.
Well,
No.
it's 100 and something, right? Close to 100, right?
No.
80, 90.
No, it's not that many years.
How long is it? So Mark is considered
Mark's
to be
first,
80.
right?
Mark, I thought, was like considered to be like 70 or 80.
Around 70, right?
Yeah. So when is the Gospel of John written?
Not 1 in 70. Between 85 and 100. So it's 15 to 30 years later.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's a long time, though.
It's still a long time.
If it's 30, let's say it's 30. That's a fucking generation.
Yeah. So these details, Jesus doesn't show up for like 30 years in the story. And again, this is what happens when people embellish stories, right? I tell the story, but every time I tell it, I add another detail, and it starts getting more and more.
We do that. We do that with our own selves. Like,
of course,
I guarantee, and we know that scientifically, we remember things different. I guarantee the way I remember things that I've done in my past is a lot different than how it actually went down.
Yeah.
It's just the way the brain works, man.
Yeah, exactly. And there have been studies on memory. We talked about this, where people tell a story and then years later change the story.
It's different.
Handful more left.
So these accounts cannot all be reconciled. I would love to see someone try to demonstrate that all of these details are inerrant and historical and happened exactly as the accounts stated. Because if you try to do that, you basically have to claim that all of the storytellers are profoundly negligent and incompetent.
That's the word right there, negligent.
Yes,
you neglected to mention the fact that Jesus fucking Christ was there himself, but you mentioned the other people in the tomb and didn't mention, oh, by the way, the guy we're all talking about was there too.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, you're also having to assume, if you're like Sean and John, that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all know the harmonized version. They all are completely aware that there is the harmonized version, but for some reason, they've decided, well, I'm only going to mention these little bits of it. I'll let Matthew and Mark later.
Which one are you going to do? Luke, which one are you going to do?
I'm just going to mention the guy in the tomb. Okay, good.
Who's going to mention Jesus? We'll mention him later, 30 years later when John gets to it.
Let's wait 40 years and we'll mention him in 40 years. Okay. Yeah, you can say, we'll save that for the end.
Say that for the end. The fourth one. The
Yeah.
fourth gospel is gonna be the banger. John, you got
I'm
this
gonna
one?
mention
Yeah, I got this one.
this badass angel that comes down and rolls away the stone.
Don't even
Okay.
mention Jesus yet. Don't drop
No,
it
no,
yet.
no. And don't mention the two angels. Okay, yeah. You know what? Let the other guy write. I'll mention the two angels. Okay, good. That are inside the tomb next to the young man. I mean, I don't know why the young man is there, but there's, but there's also two other angels. So technically there's three people in the tomb. There's a young man and two other angels, one at the head and one at the foot. And they all said the same thing. So stupid.
Y'all are still, again, this is not how adults are supposed to think.
Yes.
Which is profoundly interesting because both these people have doctorates, right?
Yeah.
Because they are leaving out very, very critical details. And that's just so clearly not what happened. That is the result of prioritizing the dogma over and directly against what the texts are actually saying. You have to throw the gospel authors under the bus and say they were terrible at their jobs. But we can weave together this Frankenstein's monster of
it's Trump's weave. It's the weave, baby.
It's the weave. It's the
weave.
A sequence of historical events by imagining that everything they said was true. They just each omitted numerous details that they very clearly should have included. And we get this sequence of events that very obviously never took place. Even if we ignore the supernatural aspects, this whole, there's an angel, there's an angel inside, there are two angels standing next to us. And actually there was this whole event where these two dudes ran to the tomb in between all these things happening. And we saw the stone being rolled away, but we're perplexed about how the stone was rolled away when we first arrived here. The notion that that sequence of events took place is absolutely laughable. That obviously didn't happen. These accounts are obviously very different stories told at different times by different folks to different audiences for different reasons. And for that reason, they included very different details. They crafted stories that contradicted each other.
Can we end, do we want to keep going on Sean? Can we end there? I don't want to even give, I'm done with Sean, but.
Well, it is, I am done with Sean. I know that they're going to come up with some, we've already seen it happen. They're going to create some bullshit. Well, but, maybe there's a way where you could possibly, oh, Lord, it's so dumb. Yeah. Aiden, the lies within nostalgia, they're so easy to believe, but now you're silent, dead and gone, and now I feel deceived. Yeah. John's comment is great too. The gospel writers are not credible. Sean and Jonathan are. If only Sean and Jonathan had been around to write these gospels,
that's just
all four of them would just been exactly the same, and they would have been completely harmonized.
That's what gets me is that no one mentioned Jesus if he's there. But John did. But John did. Yeah. And if you just historically so the earliest Christians had different communities had different gospels, right?
Yes.
So Mark's, you could have had only Mark's writing, right? Or Mark's gospel.
Right. And maybe you didn't
have your community. Yeah. So you would have no idea that Jesus was in the tomb.
That's right.
It was just some other dude or an angel, right? And then all of a sudden, you would never know that your whole life. You might die before John's gospel is written, and you're ever privy to it. You'd never know that.
There, yeah.
And John community would be like, "Oh no, Jesus was there," because that's what our story tells you. And Mark's community would be like,
"No, he wasn't.
No, he would have mentioned that."
Oh, it would. Yeah, come on. He would have mentioned that. It says right there. There's no mention of Jesus here. It says that they went. It was empty. Then they went and told people, and no one believed, or a lot of people didn't believe. The end. That's what Mark says.
How do you harmonize that? Just thinking of like an historian, Sean.
Yeah.
An historian tries to paint this picture of what actually happened. So these communities would have had these different tales. Jesus would have never been there, according to all these communities, except for the Johannine. Is that how you say that word?
Yeah,
community.
Yeah.
Which one's right? Well, they're all right. and the communities that wouldn't have had Jesus in the tomb wouldn't have been surprised when they come across John's community says Jesus was in the tomb, because that's what our gospel says.
Yeah.
They would have just gone with it. Well, no, they wouldn't have, because their text would have said that it's not.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, how does that work historically?
See, I think this should be the title of this episode when you upload it: The Gospel of Sean and John.
The Gospel of Sean and John.
This is the Gospel of Sean and John, which is so
makes so much more
sense. Yeah, that's what it is.
And that's fine. Just say what it is. That's your gospel. Let's approach it like historians, and we'll say, that's not what happened, because it seems like their sourcing is all of them, and they mushed them all together and made us.
They threw,
they threw all the gospel together and made their own gospel.
Throw in a blender and make a gospel smoothie, where
That's what it is.
It all fits through the straw.
Except we can look back and say, well, all these ingredients, they look mixed to Sean and John, but it's like, no, this ingredient came from here and this ingredient came from here.
Yeah.
They're not the same ingredient. Like, it's not a great analogy, but we know where these stories came from, essentially. And now you're creating your story, your mythology, and it's misguided, like all mythologies are, according to Tolkien, and I would agree.
Yep.
This one doesn't steer us toward any true harbor at all.
Right. Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And by the way, so this debate and these video clips are pointing out all the wild discrepancies concerning the resurrection account. But you can do the same thing with the birth of Jesus as well, and many other things that happen. And the crucifixion, yes, they don't agree on these major points in the life of Jesus, and so this is just one section. It's not like, if we harmonize somehow the resurrection accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we've solved the problem. No, you have not. You have not solved the problem. There are still problems with all these other versions of the stories as well. So I don't know. Do you want to play Sean's reaction or no?
I don't know. Do you want me to? I can. Fine.
I'm kind of curious. I know it is. I know it's gonna be bullshit, but
all right.
Focus on one particular thing he said there. He said, if you try to reconcile the accounts, you basically have to claim that all the storytellers are profoundly negligent and incompetent because they are leaving out very critical details.
Jesus was there.
Here's the key. You can't,
like Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, was there.
Infer a contradiction or negligence or incompetence from what is absent. It has to be from what is present. Again, what I said earlier.
No. Because Jesus himself is absent. The whole story is about the guy.
Whether he was alive or not at the resurrection.
Am I missing something here?
Yeah, on Easter Sunday. Was he alive or not? And 3 of the stories, Jesus doesn't appear in those actual stories. But in one of them, he does. That is, wait a minute. The other 3 guys omitted and negligent. They neglected to mention the most important thing.
I can't get over that. That's wild.
We're crazy.
Is he assumes that Luke gave us all the relevant details, but Luke doesn't say so. And it raises the question, relevant details for what?
Someone who follows Jesus, the guy who died 3 days ago?
Relevant as in terms of, I'm now going to tell you about the resurrection of Jesus. I would leave out Jesus being resurrected.
If I went to, like, Keith, God forbid you die, and I go to your funeral, and you meet me somewhere before that, and you're like, I'm alive, dude. You could go, but just tell a couple people, don't, whatever. And I don't mention anything that you were there.
That's negligent.
That would be hell. I'd be like, oh, by the way, Keith was also there, and he talked to me after he died.
I forgot to mention. Did I mention that? I guess I forgot. Sorry, guys.
I guess I forgot to mention Keith was actually there though. I saw him.
But look, Matt, you never said you were going to tell us everything. Right. You just told us something.
It's like when Clinton was like, it depends on the definition of is. Like,
that's right. Exactly.
Like, I was born at night, right? What Dad's saying. But not last night.
Luke gave sufficient details for his particular audience. Again, says there are details the gospel writers should have included. Now, if their goal was to write an account that lines up in all the detail with other gospel accounts, then yes, they should have included more details. But that's not their goal.
That's Sean's goal.
What is their goal?
What is he talking about, man?
Sean's goal is to come up with gospel that they all line up. See, but that wasn't Luke's job. That's Sean's job.
2,000 years later.
I actually think Dan said it best himself. He said these accounts are obviously very different stories told at different times by different folks to different audiences for different reasons. For that reason, they included very different details. He said different 6 times in that sentence. And I say, yes, amen. That's why it's all the differences that he's highlighting about who they're focusing on, when they wrote, who they're writing to, their motivations for writing that shape what they include and shape what they don't include.
And none of them would shape that fact. The fact that Jesus was there would not shape that at all.
Yeah. So like, hey, let's emphasize different writers at different times to different audiences, different. Okay. Yeah. But you know what they all had in common? They were all Christians wanting to know what the hell happened on Easter Sunday. And for 3 of them to leave out the very important detail that Jesus was standing right there when it happened. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. To say, well, I was talking to a different audience at a different time and I'm a different person. Yeah, you're a loser and you suck at your job.
And you suck. You could have mentioned Jesus was there, bro.
Maybe you should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. That would have been important.
Like, fucking A.
Yeah. So it's very frustrating. But again, these are the hoops you have to jump through.
Yeah, you got it. You're the Simone Biles of mental gymnastics.
That's why we have the kind of differences that we see in the gospel.
That's the only reason.
Agree.
The only reason.
Totally agree. And I'm an avid advocate of harmonization. I think harmonization is good, responsible historiographical practice, particularly when we're dealing with sources as demonstrably reliable and trustworthy as the gospel accounts. Why shouldn't we allow the accounts to illuminate and
reliable for what?
So reliable. They're reliable not when it comes to facts and details, but reliable in some other way that I can't possibly.
I agree with that, but it's gonna be yeah. They're not going to want to be. They're not going to want to employ Girardian scapegoating hermeneutics and say that they're reliable in subverting the myth of a violent God.
Yeah,
because they have a violent God.
That's right.
Clarify one another. I think that's just good historical practice, and that's not a practice that I would employ exclusively to Scripture. But I think that whether you're dealing with the Bible or secular sources, we should engage in harmonization where it's at least plausible and exercise real-world imagination for how these sources could illuminate and bring clarity to one another.
The key word there is imagination.
Well said. All right, we've got just a little bit more. Let's keep going.
And third, what we do find in the Gospels in part.
Oh, we got Sean now.
That's okay. Let's see what he does.
All right.
Particular are agreement on the big issues, but the kind of disagreements we would find on careful eyewitness testimony.
So loads of problems here. To begin, none of the gospel accounts is actual eyewitness testimony.
Thank you.
Because even if we accept traditional authorship, and even if we take the gospel authors at their word regarding what happened, none of them claimed to have witnessed what Mary Magdalene and perhaps the other Mary experienced when they arrived at the tomb. At best, they're giving us secondhand testimony given to them from one or both of the Marys. But that doesn't result in 4 different accounts unless one or both of the Marys are telling the stories differently to the different gospel authors, or the gospel authors are altering the stories as they were delivered to them. So you do not get 4 accounts from 2 eyewitnesses unless things are changed along the way. And the notion that disagreements between eyewitness testimonies is evidence in favor of their truth is nonsense, because disagreements are contradictions. And so you've already given away the store. If they disagree, they contradict. And so you have to say at that point, well, they disagree because they perceive things differently, or they remember them differently. That's still contradiction.
Still a contradiction. You're just explaining why the contradiction is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Or both of them is misremembering or misunderstanding or mispresenting the data. They cannot all be true. So then you've got to go to, well, they are all true. We just have to assume that one is giving one set of details and the other is omitting that set of details while giving a different set of details. So either those disagreements can be harmonized and they're not disagreements at all. They're just omissions of data from the narrative, or they are disagreements and they cannot be harmonized and therefore they are contradictions. So this type of apologetic approach is a kind of scattershot, throw the spaghetti against the wall, and hopefully the spaghetti will stick to somebody who needs to be justified by this. Because you cannot argue that there are disagreements and that's evidence of the truth of the testimonies, but there aren't disagreements because they're actually all true and they're just omitting details because they are awful storytellers. These cannot all be true at the same time. Either these stories contradict or they do not. And they very clearly contradict.
By saying the Gospels are eyewitness testimony does not mean every aspect of the Gospels is eyewitness testimony. That's not my point. He said none of the accounts is actual eyewitness testimony. Now, there are accounts in the Gospel that are passed on secondhand, of course, such as what the women experienced and he pointed out. That's obvious. Of course, there are accounts like that. Anybody who reads it knows that they had to pass that on to the gospel writers. My point here is about the gospels as a whole. So earlier I used the women at the tomb and the number of angels as an example, but here I'm talking about the gospels as a whole. Now, I'm not going to stop and make a case that they involve eyewitness testimony. That would take us far aside. But I point to some very careful scholarship, people like Richard Bauckham in his book, Jesus as Eyewitnesses. I mean, Richard Bauckham, his scholarship, he's a...
I thought it was Bauckham, no?
Yeah, I think it's Bauckham.
Professor Emeritus at University of St. Andrews, senior scholar at Ridley Hall, Cambridge. I'm only pointing this out because Dan has kind of characterized all apologetics as just low bar, performing something to make people feel good. You have, again, another leading scholar making a case. Now, one more thing here, and then you weigh in here, Jonathan.
Still not answering.
Is he says specifically.
Yeah.
He's not answering the specific objections that Dan had.
All he did was name drop and say
He
where
name dropped.
Bauckham went to and all the places,
That
all the
guy's
scholars.
Smart. Yeah.
That guy's smart. Cambridge. Something else.
Either those disagreements can be harmonized and they're not disagreements at all, or they are disagreements and they cannot be harmonized and therefore they are contradictions. This is a binary either or way of thinking. In other words, it's A or it's B. It's either or binary thinking.
What else is it, Sean?
Sometimes binary thinking is okay. As Richard Rohr says, to reject the binary is itself binary.
Yeah. Yeah. Is he going to give us a third option here?
Well, no, I think he's accusing Dan of
okay.
only presenting two.
Actually, a third option, and it's logically called splitting the horns of the dilemma. And this is what I'm going to suggest, that neither of his two binary options are actually right, but C, there are disagreements and they can be plausibly harmonized.
Yes, no, sure.
Of course,
I think
could.
McClellan's point would be that then they are negligent.
Yes,
they're bad at storytelling. Like they're negligent.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, was Jesus there? Oh, forgot to mention that.
Oh, yeah. Should I have said that? Yeah. I guess
that's like Tolkien writes all 6 books of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And gets to the end and forgets to have Frodo at the top of Mount Doom. It's
right.
like, oh, that's right. Frodo was carrying the ring.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Shit. Forgot to mention him. Like,
yeah, but again, I think Dan makes another good point that I hadn't considered until we got to this debate here, right? Like when it comes to quote unquote eyewitnesses to the resurrection, it's really Mary Magdalene and a handful of other women that were at the tomb, right? And maybe Peter, if you get in, with him running to the tomb. It's a small group of eyewitnesses that you would have to interview, whether your name is Mark or Matthew or Luke or John. You're going to have to interview those people. And so it's not like, oh no, John saw something that Mark didn't. Well, none of them saw anything. They only are reporting what they are secondhand hearing if they interviewed the person, Mary Magdalene, one of the other women, or maybe Peter, right? Other than that, there are no eyewitnesses of this event. So you've interviewed the same 2 or 3 people, and yet these 4 people have come up with 4 different stories. So again, either the person telling the story, the eyewitness, told the story different 4 different times to 4 different people, or at least one or the majority of the other 4 people, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, didn't take good notes. They didn't ask the right questions. They didn't transcribe the response correctly. Again, that goes to Dan's point of negligence, right? You have failed to do your job accurately.
And Sean's response is only basically like, "Oh, well, they didn't say that was going to be their job." Well, yeah, but Luke never said he was going to tell you all the relevant all the details. Just one's relevant, but Jesus is not relevant to all the synoptics. Jesus is not relevant.
Yeah,
that's just like certain types of Christianity. John Suarez has a great point. Well, gender is binary, though, right, Sean?
That's right. What's wrong with binary, Sean?
These people say is only male and female, man and woman, right?
No, but Sean in this case was able to recognize a potential 3rd category to the binary. Imagine.
But not when it comes to human gender and sexuality and sex and none of that. All strictly binary, huh, Sean?
Just male and female. That's it.
Silly wabbit.
All right. Well, we're over our hour here. I think
we're well over an hour.
We're over an hour, and I don't think that the rest of this video is going to get any better. So we can probably leave it there.
Again, it's when apologetics is your goal.
Yeah.
You have to come up with some wacky, wavy mental gymnastics.
Yes.
And to me, like, look, if God wrote the Bible through people, however they want to justify their theory of inspiration, he could have been a better storyteller.
Yeah.
Like the Bible that we got, I love it in its context, and I love it as a mythology and historical document and everything. But the Bible that evangelicals and apologists like these two give us is a laughably dead text.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded of a phrase about how it's impossible. I think this is the way the quote goes. It's impossible to convince someone that something is true if their job depends on them not seeing it. And when you are an apologist, and when you start from the assumption that cannot change or be challenged, which is that the Bible is inerrant and infallible and has no contradictions, then I don't care who you are never going to be able to convince that apologist that there actually are contradictions, because they've made up their mind ahead of time that such a thing is impossible. And their job depends on them not seeing those contradictions, because the minute they admit that there's a contradiction, they're out of a job as an apologist. They're no longer an apologist. They have to decide that they want to do something else with their life.
Which good. Go find something else.
Yeah, please, actually. Go do something else.
Go do something else. Well, this has been fun. Everyone go to thecollective.com. If you're listening on the podcast after this live stream, it's going to be linked in the show notes. If you're watching the live stream, I've got it scrolling on the bottom, thecollective.com.
Yeah, please.
Subscribe. It's going to be hopefully not shut down by the Trump administration this year.
Well, we're going to do our best. We're going to do everything we can to at least make them wish that they could.
Yeah. And we'll see you on Tuesday's show.
Yep. See you guys on Tuesday.
What do we have Tuesday?
It's the episode with Jesse Dollamore.
Ah, yes.
Michael Burns from Wisecrack, and Doug Padgett from Vote Common Good. It's a really good conversation about why conservatives fear empathy.
The sin of empathy, baby.
Yeah. What's up with that?
What's up with the sin of empathy, you sinner? You empathize too much.
I know. It's a slippery slope when you start caring for other human beings. And
from love to care to empathy.
Yeah, watch out.
Watch out. All right. We'll see you then. Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Go do something nice for your mother if that's possible.
Please.
All right, we out of here.
See you guys.